Welcome, welcome. Buongiorno. Come stai? Welcome back to another Gentleman Art with JB. As promised via my Instagram, Jimmy Beal Art, I promised you guys I would be posting a finished version of this later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically finish off Hulk here. I've already sort of pretty much got Wolverine sorted. And I'm just going to take you guys along with me today as I work on this Herb Trimpe Homage cover. Right? This is a part of a demo for my students, but I figured I'd open it up and just open the floor up a bit and share it with my YouTube subscribers as well. And Wolverine and Hulk are probably two of my favorite characters. And just, I don't know, they were, X-Men when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, X-Men was all the rage. They were the biggest game in town. Yeah, especially Wolverine was such a cool character. His popularity really exploded, and for good reason. I mean, he was he was just so, such an action hero, brought to life on the page with his adamantium claws and his mysterious backstory, because you have to remember back then no one knew where Wolverine came from or what his story was really. No one kind of knew what his deal was. But yeah, this is just a little sort of a homage piece that I'm sort of working on here. And gonna go through and probably ink this on my channel as well after I'm done here penciling. That'll be a separate video. And like I said, right now I'm just going through and massing in, blocking in the shapes. I mean, I've kind of already blocked in his shapes for his torso. He's got pretty yoked musculature, kind of similar to Wolverine, although even more so. This actually was a particularly tough pose because I had to incorporate a lot of foreshortening, having the arm come out at you, having trying to get that roundness and volume, sort of voluminous quality of the arm as the surface wrapping around the shape coming out and the foreshortening of the different forms. But you can see I sort of start out with a wireframe up here, just like I did with my Magneto piece, and I go from there. So what I do is I work with a 0.5 Pentel mechanical pencil. I also will take a piece of printer paper or scratch off paper and occasionally do this to sharpen my mechanical pencil. And also I use the paper, as I'm left-handed, I use the paper to sort of act as a barrier between my hand as it's sliding over the surface of the work area and the drawing itself. That way I minimize smudging, I prevent smudging. And I typically don't really use, I used to use a mechanical eraser. I actually still have some of my old nibs from like almost a decade ago. But my mechanical eraser broke, and I found that I was really stiffening up as a result of it. So when I do like comic work especially, I tend not to really go in for mechanical erasers. I'll mainly use a putty eraser. Occasionally I'll use a drafting eraser. And then if I'm doing geometry, obviously I'll use a ruler to mass in my perspective grid, block in my perspective grid, all that good stuff. This is actually a pretty dynamic pose that the Hulk has here, and a lot of the work is already done for me in the Herb Trimpe original. He's got really solid command of anatomy, a really solid grasp of the references here. I'm not really a crazy big fan of the pose he chose for Wolverine here, but I love the foreshortening of the arm here. So I sort of changed up the pose a little bit to have Wolverine coming out more directly at us rather than like, hey, coming in from the side. And also, even though this anatomy, if you look at the silhouette, it's pretty on point, it just looks a little awkward. When you look at like some of the stuff coming in, comparing it to some of the stuff coming out today in terms of how, if you try to go in and define these muscles further, it would start to look awkward. I think if you're going to do this type of pose, you really need to do it in this type of a style where the forms are simplified and, you're using economy of line. If you really want to get into the nitty-gritty and get more like, ornate and rendered with things, I just felt like a different pose would suit my purposes better for that particular goal. I'm still incorporating foreshortening, but this gives me more of a money shot of the torso. I can kind of go in a noodle way a bit more here without it looking awkward or stiff. So what I'm doing is I'm just coming down and extending out these edges giving him a little bit of and this is a cover that's been homaged a lot of times. Again, Herb Trimpe is the original artist. This is a reproduction of his cover. So I actually did a pumpkin that was a Herb Trimpe homage. I did a illustrated pumpkin for the studio that I work for in the fall. They do a lot of licensed art, and I ended up doing a live sculpture of Wolverine versus Hulk on a Herb Trimpe, you know, the Herb Trimpe cover on a pumpkin. I also did a Castlevania pumpkin, which was pretty insane. And oddly enough, one of the original creators of the Nintendo Castlevania, an older Asian gentleman, came up to me when I was in Chicago doing these commissions, and he told me that he worked on the original Castlevania. He thought my drawing was really sweet, and that kind of meant the world to me, that someone who worked on the original game really thought that much of my drawing. Sorry about that. We got a little bit of a power drain there. We're about 6 minutes in. I'm gonna try and get through this fairly quick. And I'm just kind of going right over a lot of my line work here. I can go in and sort of simplify some of these forms. Notice how I use my egg shape to get the silhouette of my rib cage. And I can go through here and just comb over the excess line work to get a ghost line. And then I'm going right over my ghost line to get the sort of final line art. And then when I go to scan it, in theory, like if I were to reproduce this, it would be on blue line, and the ghost line wouldn't get picked up by the scanner after inking. Simplify the forms a little bit here. Some channels guys should check out, specifically with superhero art and comic art. Dave Finch, he's got a pretty sweet YouTube channel. He's gotten way more active recently, and guy's a master at anatomy. Super beneficial. A lot you can learn from him. He's a over 20 years veteran in the industry. I think he worked under I want to say he worked for Top Cow, and he was one of their in-house artists. I think he got his start in the art in the 90s working for Top Cow. And then he's done Aphrodite 9, he's done a bunch of different titles for them. But he was there at the same time. I think Michael Broussard was there and all those guys. Pretty sweet, I don't know if he ever worked with Michael Turner when Michael Turner was alive. But Dave Finch seems like a really solid guy too. Very mild-mannered, very sort of relaxed and humble personality. Just really into the work. Doesn't get caught up in any of the cult of personality stuff, which is really nice. So I'll even put David Finch on at night and listen to him for white noise. He's it's like almost like ASM. What did they call it? ASMR. So yeah, you can see I'm kind of going through, tightening up a little, but not stiffening up. That's the goal. You can tighten up, but don't stiffen up. You want to have a solid gamut of lights and darks. I'm looking at some of the shading too on the Herb Trimpe piece here, so I don't have a good excuse, guys. I mean, I've got all the reference right in front of me, so if I screw this one up, you guys can take me to the carpet. Right? I'll try and incorporate some of Trimpe's shading methodology here. I'm just double checking how that looks in my video cam. And also, to be honest, I want to make sure that the camera doesn't freeze up again. I gotta check the power on the camera. This is pretty sweet. I think he's buff enough. I think he's pretty freaking yoked there. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna come up and like work into the shoulder a bit here. You can see I have an egg too for the shoulder. It's all about shape language and shape relationships, even with something like comics, right? You want, especially with something like comics, where you know you're drawing figures out of your head mainly. But you know, even guys again like David Finch will be the first person to tell you that he still uses copious amounts of reference for things like backs. I actually watched the video that he put out last night where he's talking about backs, and I'll put the link to that video in the cards. But no, Dave Finch, you know, tons of useful information to be gained watching his channel. And again, you're talking about a 20-year vet working at the highest levels in the industry. A guy who really knows his stuff and humble as heck. A friend of mine, actually my close friend, V. Kenneth Marion, is a penciler at DC Comics. And I'll also post a link to his work. And Ken and I have known each other for over a decade now. We trained together at Pratt, and both had a same teacher, a mentor figure in the form of one Mr. Floyd Hughes, who runs the graphic novel classes over at Pratt. And I don't know if he's still there, but he was a really remarkable and encouraging teacher. He wasn't one of those teachers that would critique you, would tell you stink and try to get you better through telling you how much you needed to improve. He was one of those teachers who thought you get more with honey than you do with wine. He still kept it real. I mean, you know, there were definitely points where I took his classes where I had some wake-up calls where he was like, listen, I like you, but I can't pass you if you don't put in the work. So, you know, I'm not gonna, you know, he definitely like was doing his due diligence there, making sure that we were getting the skills we needed. But I think his role more than anything else was to encourage us to keep going at that stage of the game. Because when you're in Pratt, or not even Pratt, just any art school or a college, be it a junior college or a community college, I mean, the reality is most people are not gonna be good enough to work after 4 years of college. They're just not. Like, this stuff takes about a decade to get your brain around. I know there's people out there that'll tell you different, even some really reputable telliers that'll tell you can get good at this stuff in 3 years. I mean, for some people, yeah, that's possible, especially if you go to a high caliber school, like I'm thinking Hubert's or Watts, right? Most schools aren't them. And the reality is that you're going to be relying on your network of friends who are also on this journey with you, this artistic journey, and you're also going to be relying on a lot of initiative on your own part to go out and actively seek that knowledge at conventions from art directors, from editors, and you're going to be learning through applying to jobs. And when you're doing indie work, trying to cut your teeth, you're going to be learning on the job in a lot of cases, and you're going to be learning on the job in some cases for free, because they're going to pay you back end. So I mean, that's the reality. I mean, like, this stuff just takes a long time to get good at, and like, I hesitate to say that to students because I'm also of the Floyd Hughes school of thought, right? Being that you do get more with honey than you do with wine. You get more out of students, especially in the beginning, by encouraging them rather than telling them how difficult it's going to be, because, you know, you can scare students away from the pursuit of art as a vocation and career in some cases if you're not careful, right? There's a balancing act with beginners that you need to straddle. I feel like you don't want to just tell them that they're going to be fine and just get a job and like fool them. You're doing them a disservice if you do that. But at the same time, you need to like point out what they're doing right innately and what they're doing wrong, because I do firmly believe that everybody has innate sensibilities that they gravitate towards, the strengths that they can exploit, and then there's weaknesses that they can improve on as well and turn into strengths over time. Like anatomy used to be a real weakness of mine, and I actually on my Facebook posted a picture I did a decade ago of a Atlantis comic with some really god-awful anatomy. And like the thing was, if you looked at my work back then and asked me would I ever had a pitch greenlit by Marcosia, would I have ever gotten in with a talent agency, would I ever be teaching this stuff now, the answer you probably would have come to, the conclusion you would have come to was no. But the thing is, I kept pressing on, and you know, I mean, I got a dressing down from Chris Warner at Dark Horse, I remember years ago. It basically told me my anatomy stunk. And instead of like, you know, going off and crying in a corner, what I did was I looked at Andrew Loomis and retooled my style and actively like revamped my style. And that, coupled with me taking the initiative and looking at how these artists were getting hired, you know, i.e. getting agents, helped me get a good amount of work, you know. And eventually, a lot of that stuff that I did when I was retooling my style helped me get noticed by a local arts atelier. And the director liked my perspective work in a lot of these cyberpunk comic pages that I was producing at the time. And he said, this is some of the best perspective I've ever seen, and that really got me in the door as far as like, you know, my teaching career is concerned. At least, you know, with that particular atelier, when that spun off into a bunch of different opportunities for me. So, I mean, that all came from a critique by Dark Horse's editor, Chris Warner. So I'm actually just trying to like figure out here this bicep area. Well, I've been rambling. I've been remiss in like actually I've been remiss in my ramblings about the comic industry, in paying attention to my muscle structure here, but it doesn't look like it's that far off. I've got the shoulder masked in. I just gotta feather this out. Herb Trimpe is definitely giving us a little more of this bicep, right? I'm kind of compressing things a little bit, but that's okay. I think in the inking section, that's when I'm going to draw on Wendigo and draw on the chains in the background and whatnot. For this section, I'm just going to finish off the Hulk here. But the X-Men are like my favorite characters. They're also particularly difficult to draw, but they look awesome if you can pull them off. That's the thing. And they're like one of those characters, sort of like where difficult to draw, easy to make look lame, right? But if you can pull off a particular look with them, they look awesome. I think, like, again, some of the best X-Men artists, in my opinion, I have to say Mr. Jim Lee, DC Comics, Mr. DC Comics extraordinaire, you know? In my opinion, he never should have left. He never should have left Marvel. He should have stayed at Marvel. I mean, not in. This is after Image, of course, but I mean, in my opinion, rather than go back to DC, if he was going to leave Image, he just went back to Marvel and drew X-Men. I think that's like, his X-Men is still some of his best work. It's not like as anatomically correct as his later stuff, but so dynamic, and he's just so much more of a natural fit for Marvel characters than he is for DC characters. He'd probably vehemently disagree with me, but, you know, he's just got that extreme sort of ornate line, extreme kinetic line, and like extreme style down that like encapsulated the X-Men in the 90s. And like, Superman is just not that as a character. I love Superman, don't get me wrong. Like, Superman, I got into comics from reading Superman, but like, he's just not like edgy. Like, Jim Lee's style is borderline edgy. It was edgy at the time, and it was risky at the time when, you know, and it just landed, and it was like a pull no punches type of art style, like, you know, this kinetic lines and this sort of incorporating anime influences, and, you know, incorporating John Byrne, but then flipping the script. The same thing with a lot of those guys at the time, and like another guy that I really like was Andy Kubert. His work on X-Men, again, another guy who's changed his style over the years and kind of simplified and economized his line, and for sure you can find stuff in his X-Men and say, hell, look at this foot, look at that, look at there, but like at the end of the day, I felt like Andy Kubert had a really dynamic style, and I feel like that shined through on his X-Men work. Really, DC's kind of known for having the hot artists now, like the guys who have the flair, the styles with flair and like the ornate line work. But back in the day, Marvel had those artists on lock. You had like guys like again, Jim Lee, and then later Andy Kubert. You had guys like even in a little later on, you had Joe Mad come on the scene. He did X-Men for a while. You had who else? I mean, Jim Lee and Andy Kubert were the big X-Men guys. Of course, you had Rob Liefeld. You had whatchamacallit, I believe Brett Booth, Greg Capullo, X-Force, right? Who I didn't even realize that was Greg Capullo. I mean, I thought his work was, extremely well done, but it wasn't like, it didn't have the distinctive look that it does now. Like, I think Capullo actually has sort of improved quite a bit, found his unique voice. He probably, he heard me scoff, what do you know, kid? But, I actually have a lot of love for Greg Capullo. I have a lot of respect for the guy. I listened to his story, coming from a working class town in Poughkeepsie, and people just were rooting against him. I feel like listening to his story about how he got into Marvel and the crap that he had to put up with from the editors there at the time, and like how they looked at him as like this rube from Poughkeepsie, and he kind of had to like fight that sort of stereotype and fight the sort of class biases that were arrayed against him and persevere. I have a lot of respect for Capullo. They didn't just hand him a job, he had to scrape and fight for that shot that he got. And McFarlane too. McFarlane's another guy that had to scrape and fight to get his foot in the door. Getting rejected over 800 times. I mean, I have his book, and I highly recommend it, The Art of Todd McFarlane. And you should check it out. He goes into length about how difficult it was to get, to get work. He had moonlighting as a janitor initially, and just not easy at all to, when you have a young wife and a kid and you're working as a janitor, to get in there and get work. So let me just step back, take a look through the camera here. Not bad. I may make these abs a little bigger. Because I feel like he would have bigger abs. And I'm trying to go through this fairly quick. I'll probably cut this soon. What are we at? 23. I'll cut this at half an hour. Let me just check the time here. We're at 16. Okay. Make sure that's still recording. Yeah, that looks more like it. Sweet. I just had to, like, make his abs more in proportion with the rest of his torso, because like those bottom abdominal muscles are kind of covered by his legs. They're sort of snaking up and lurching forward. Gonna have a sip of my coffee here. You can see a lot of this stuff really, a lot of this type of work, it's about shape relationships and shape language, not really so much rendering. I mean, yes, you need to know how to indicate light and shadow in line as opposed to value, and vice versa if you're painting, but like that doesn't matter if your structure isn't correct. Right. And this was, again, this is a fun cover to kind of do a master study of, this Herb Trimpe cover, just because it's so, you know, so iconic. It's got two awesome, like really awesome characters, in the Hulk and Wolverine. Let me get this hand all done here. So with this hand, what I want to do is come in and get the planes down that we're going to be working on. So and Trimpe does such a great job of mapping all this out for us. Just adjusting the musculature here a bit. It's looking pretty sweet. And we're at 29, so I'm going to cut this soon, but I'll post the finished image in the thumb. But I just wanted to kind of crank out this video for you guys. huge hands. Alright, well it's 30, so what I'm gonna do is just cut this. But let me show you what I've got so far. And I'll probably do a part 2 of this as well. So I'm just gonna cut it here, and part 2 will be the inking, right? Alright guys, thanks for joining me today. I'll talk to you guys soon, and have a great day. Alright, arrivederci, and goodbye.